As the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the only sound in the packed town hall was my own steady breathing. That's the ending, but the story didn't start there. It started with a letter, a single piece of beige paper that felt heavier than it had any right to be. If you've ever had to deal with a homeowners association, you know the kind of letter I'm talking about. What would you do if someone tried to take a piece of your family's history? Let me know where you're watching from, because I imagine this kind of fight happens everywhere. This is the story of how my quiet retirement was interrupted by an HOA tyrant who tried to annex my 100-year-old family ranch, and how I used her own arrogance and my great-grandfather's foresight to bring her entire world crashing down. If you want to hear more stories where the little guy gets the last laugh, make sure you subscribe. My name is Arthur Pennywell. I'm a civil engineer, or at least I was. For 40 years, I designed bridges and plotted roadways, spending my days in a world of precise angles, stress tolerances, and the unyielding logic of physics. My life was built on solid foundations, both literally and figuratively. Then, my wife, Eleanor, passed away, and the foundation of my own life turned to sand. The blueprints we'd made for our golden years were suddenly just useless paper. The big house in the city felt like a mausoleum. Every room echoed with her absence. So, I did the only thing that made sense. I packed up my life, sold the monument to our shared past, and retreated to the one place that had always been a constant, the Pennywell Ranch. It wasn't a sprawling, Texas-sized operation. It was 150 acres of rolling California hills, dotted with ancient oaks and seasonal creeks, tucked away in a valley that was rapidly being devoured by suburbia. My great-grandfather had received the land as a grant from the state for his work on the original aqueduct system. It was a block of sovereign land, an island of history surrounded by a rising tide of beige stucco. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for peace. I wanted to spend my days repairing the old fences my grandfather had built, clearing brush, and watching the hawks ride the thermals. I wanted the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts again. For the first 6 months, I had it. The rhythm of the ranch was a balm on my grief. The physical labor tired my body and quieted my mind. I was rebuilding, not just fences, but myself. Then, they finished building Willow Creek Estates. It rose up on the eastern border of my property like a fungus. A perfectly planned, obsessively regulated community of identical houses painted in one of 3 approved shades of taupe. Their manicured lawns stopped at a new, ridiculously ornate fence that abutted my rustic, 4-strand barbed wire. It was a stark border between 2 different centuries. I paid them no mind. Their world of pristine sidewalks and synchronized trash pickup days had nothing to do with me. I was a separate country. That's what I thought, anyway. I met her for the first time on a Tuesday. I was out fixing a stretch of fence line, the satisfying ache of hard work in my shoulders. A gleaming white SUV, the size of a small tank, pulled up on the other side of the property line. A woman emerged, dressed in tennis whites that looked like they'd never seen a court. She had a haircut you could set your watch by and sunglasses that hid her eyes but not her disapproval. This was Brenda Von Hess, the president, queen, and self-appointed deity of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Is this your property?" I straightened up, wiping sweat from my brow with the back of a leather glove. "It is." She gestured vaguely at my fence. "That fence is not up to community standards." I looked at my fence. It was old, the cedar posts weathered to a silver gray, but it was sturdy and it was on my land. Then I looked at her pristine, wrought iron and brick pillar monstrosity. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is my community. Not yours." A flicker of something, annoyance, disbelief, crossed her face. "Willow Creek has standards to maintain property values." "That, eyesore," she said, waving a dismissive hand at my work, "is a violation." I almost laughed. A violation of what? My own standards. I assure you, it meets them just fine. "We have bylaws," she snapped, as if the word itself was a weapon. "You'll be receiving a formal notice." And with that, she got back in her tank and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust and entitlement in her wake. I thought it was a joke. A classic case of a suburban control freak not understanding where a tiny kingdom ended. I was wrong. The letter arrived a week later. Official HOA letterhead. It was a formal citation. Violation, non-compliant fencing material, Code 14b2, it demanded I replace my entire eastern fence line with one that matched theirs, at my own expense. It included a fine of $100 for the initial violation, with a $50 per day penalty until rectified. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like getting a speeding ticket from the government of Monaco for driving in Colorado. They had absolutely zero jurisdiction. My ranch was never part of their development, never annexed, and had no covenants with them whatsoever. I typed up a polite, concise response. I explained that my property, APN 072-010-001, was not and had never been subject to the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Willow Creek Estates. I included a copy of my property deed and a plat map showing the clear boundary line. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. I was an engineer. I believed in documentation and clear communication. I assumed that would be the end of it. A simple misunderstanding, cleared up by facts and reason. That was my first mistake. I was trying to use logic on an adversary who operated entirely on ego. Brenda Von Hess did not respond to my letter. Instead, the escalation began. A week later, I received another fine. This one was for unkempt landscape visible from community property, Code 11C4. She was citing me for the wild, golden grasses on my hillsides. The native California landscape that had been there for 1,000 years. Apparently, it didn't meet her standards for turf height. Then came the phone calls. First to the County Code Enforcement Office. Someone from Willow Creek filed an anonymous complaint about illegal structures on my property. That would be my 100-year-old barn. An inspector came out, a tired-looking man named Dave. He took one look at the barn, one look at his paperwork, and sighed. "Let me guess," he said. "Neighbor is a woman named Brenda. You know her?" I asked. "We have a whole file cabinet just for her complaints," he said, shaking his head. "Sorry to waste your time, Mr. Pennywell. That barn's been grandfathered in since before this county even had a planning department." He left, and I felt a small victory. But the victory was short-lived. The complaints kept coming. A complaint to the fire department about my brush clearance, even though I maintained a 100-foot defensible space as required by law. A complaint to the agricultural commissioner about my small herd of cattle, claiming they were a public nuisance. Each one required me to take time out of my day to meet with an official, show my paperwork, and prove my innocence. It was harassment by bureaucracy. A death by 1,000 paper cuts. Brenda took her campaign public, or at least, public within her little fiefdom. She began posting on the Willow Creek Estates private social media page. A neighbor I'd befriended, a quiet accountant named Mark who occasionally walked his beagle along the property line, showed me the posts. Urgent community alert, one read. The derelict property bordering our beautiful community continues to be a source of code violations and is severely impacting our property values. The owner is unresponsive and hostile. The board is exploring all legal options to compel compliance. Hostile. I had sent one polite, factual letter. The comments below were a mix of support for their queen and a few hesitant questions. "Are you sure his property is part of the HOA?" one brave soul asked. Brenda's response was swift and brutal. "We have consulted our lawyers and the original development plans. The boundary lines are clear. He is in violation. End of discussion." She was lying. It was a bald-faced, easily disprovable lie. But in her echo chamber, it was gospel. She was building a narrative, painting me as a villain who threatened their suburban paradise. The annoyance I had felt initially began to curdle into a cold, simmering anger. This wasn't about a fence anymore. This was about a bully who couldn't stand the existence of something she didn't control. The real turning point, the moment my patient, methodical approach died and was replaced by something much harder, came on a Saturday morning in early October. It was about a tree. Not just any tree. It was a coast live oak, a magnificent giant that stood just inside my property line. Its branches, thick as a man's waist, spread out over the fence, providing a canopy of shade that extended 20 feet into the backyard of one of the Willow Creek houses. My great-grandfather had planted it as a sapling the year my grandfather was born. It was a living monument, a part of my family's soul rooted in the earth. I was drinking coffee on my porch when I saw the truck. A commercial tree trimming service, parked on the street inside Willow Creek. 2 men were unloading chainsaws and ropes. They were gathered in the backyard of the house beneath the oak's canopy, and with them, pointing up at the branches, was Brenda Von Hess. My coffee cup hit the wooden porch with a crack. I was moving before I even consciously decided to. I strode across my pasture, my boots sinking into the damp earth, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. I reached the fence line just as one of the men was starting a chainsaw. The roar cut through the quiet morning air like a scream. "Hold on!" I yelled over the noise. "You shut that thing off. Now." The man, startled, killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Brenda turned to face me, a smug smile plastered on her face. "Mr. Pennywell," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're just doing a little community maintenance. This tree is a nuisance. Its leaves clog my residence gutters, and its branches are a safety hazard." "That tree is on my property," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You lay one saw blade on it, and I will call the sheriff for destruction of property and trespassing." "According to our survey," she said, holding up a rolled-up piece of paper that was probably a takeout menu, "the trunk may be on your side, but the canopy overhang constitutes an encroachment. We have every right to trim it back to the property line." "You do not have the right to set foot on my land to do it," I countered. "And if you damage the health of that tree, which is a protected native species, by the way, the fines from the county will make your HOA fees look like pocket change." Her smile faltered for a second. She hadn't counted on that. "We have an easement," she bluffed, her voice recovering its imperious tone. "No, you don't," I said flatly. "I own this land free and clear. There are no easements, no covenants, no attachments of any kind to your little kingdom of beige. Now, I suggest you and your men get back in your truck and leave. This is your only warning." I stared at her, channeling every ounce of anger and grief and frustration from the past few months into that single, unwavering gaze. I think for the first time, she realized I wasn't some doddering old man she could steamroll. She saw something in my eyes that gave her pause. She scoffed, a theatrical, dismissive sound. "This isn't over, Pennywell. You will be brought into compliance." She turned and marched away, the 2 tree trimmers looking confusedly between us before packing up their gear. I stood there long after they were gone, my hand resting on the rough bark of the oak tree. My heart was still hammering. She had tried to cut down a piece of my family. A piece of my history. This was no longer a squabble over rules and regulations. This was war. And I, a man who had spent his entire life building things, decided it was time to orchestrate a demolition. That afternoon, I went to the old steel safe in my study. The combination, my wife's birthday, was an act of muscle memory that still brought a pang to my chest. Inside, beneath old stock certificates and my parents' wedding album, was a long, leather-bound folder. I carefully lifted it out. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the state seal was still clear. It was the original 1908 land grant, signed by the governor himself. It granted my great-grandfather, Thomas Pennywell, and his heirs, in perpetuity, the 150 acres of land described in the attached survey. It was not a deed that could be bought or sold into a new development. It was a foundational document, a piece of sovereign history. It was my shield. But a shield wasn't enough. I needed a sword. My engineering career had taught me one thing above all else: you don't solve a problem until you understand every single variable. Brenda Von Hess was my problem. I needed to understand her. I spent the next week not on the ranch, but in the county records office. The place smelled of old paper and dust, a scent I found comforting. I started with Willow Creek Estates. I pulled every public document, the articles of incorporation for the HOA, the CC and RS, the minutes from their board meetings, and most importantly, the final plat maps from their development. I took the maps home and scanned them into my computer at high resolution. Then I overlaid them with the original county survey maps and the survey from my great-grandfather's land grant. My professional-grade CAD software allowed me to compare them down to the inch. And that's when I found it. It was small. A deliberate bit of cartographic fudging. Along the entire half-mile border we shared, the Willow Creek plat map was off. Their property line was shown about 3 feet inside my own. It wasn't a mistake, the survey markers noted on their map didn't match the official county records. They had, in essence, drawn a new line on a map and declared it reality. 3 feet may not sound like much, but over a half-mile, it was a significant slice of land. It was my land. The land my ancient oak tree stood on. The land my fence was on. This discovery lit a fire in my gut. This wasn't just harassment, it was a calculated attempt at a land grab. But why? For 3 feet of scrub? It didn't make sense. So I kept digging. I shifted my focus from the HOA to Brenda Von Hess, the individual. Public records are a beautiful thing. I looked up her business filings, property records, and political contributions. And there it was. Brenda wasn't just an HOA president. She was the managing partner of a real estate development firm, Von Hess Properties, LLC. And Von Hess Properties had recently filed a preliminary application with the county to build Willow Creek Estates, Phase 2. The proposed location for Phase 2 was the undeveloped land to the north and west of my ranch. The problem for her was access. The only way to connect her proposed new development to the existing roads and utilities of Phase 1 was through a parcel of land. My parcel of land. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. The fence, the fines, the harassment, the attempt to claim a 3-foot buffer, it wasn't about property values or community standards. It was a corporate strategy. She was manufacturing a border dispute, trying to establish a history of noncompliance and legal conflict. She was trying to devalue my property and paint me as an uncooperative landowner so that when she made her move to acquire my land, either through a lowball offer or some twisted legal maneuver, she could present herself to the county as the reasonable party. She wasn't just trying to bully me. She was trying to steal my home. A cold, clear calm settled over me. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot, raging fire. It had been forged into something cold, hard, and sharp. Like steel. I was no longer a grieving widower seeking peace. I was an engineer with a problem to solve. And the problem was Brenda Von Hess. My plan began to form, not in a flash of inspiration, but piece by piece, like a bridge being built. It would be methodical. It would be documented. And it would be poetic. I called it Project Longview, named for the highest point on my ranch, a place from which you could see everything for miles around. I intended to get a very clear view of Brenda's downfall. Phase 1 was simple, observation and documentation. I was done reacting to her. From now on, I would be setting the terms of engagement. I spent a small fortune on a state-of-the-art surveillance system. Not little doorbell cameras, but high-definition, night vision, motion-activated cameras with powerful zoom lenses. I installed them myself, placing them discreetly in trees and on fence posts along our entire shared border. They were positioned to capture not just my property, but the backyards of the HOA homes and the common areas adjacent to my land. Everything was recorded to a secure server in my house. Phase 2 was baiting the trap. I drafted a new letter. This one was not polite. It was a formal cease and desist, drafted with the help of an old friend who was a retired property lawyer. It was addressed to the entire Willow Creek HOA Board of Directors, not just Brenda. The letter methodically dismantled their claims. It cited the specific state and county codes they were violating through their harassment. It detailed the false reports they had filed. And it included my own certified survey map, the one I'd created using their data and the county records. My map clearly showed their 3-foot encroachment onto my property. The letter concluded with a simple, non-negotiable demand: you will immediately cease all contact, remove any and all notices or liens placed against my property, and within 30 days, you will remove your fence from my land. Failure to comply will result in legal action seeking damages for trespassing, slander of title, and harassment. I sent a copy to each board member's home address via certified mail. I wanted to make sure Brenda couldn't just intercept it and hide it from them. I wanted to sow dissent in her ranks. Then, I waited. I knew Brenda's ego wouldn't allow her to admit she was wrong. She would see my letter not as a warning, but as a declaration of war. And I knew she would escalate. I was counting on it. It took less than 48 hours for the bait to be taken. My friend Mark, the Beagle owner, called me. "Arthur," he said, his voice hushed. You might want to see the community forum. Brenda's gone ballistic. I logged onto the public-facing part of their website. Brenda had posted a scan of my letter, redacting the other board members' names. Her commentary was a masterpiece of hysterical self-righteousness. Community under attack, the headline screamed in all caps. The hostile owner of the adjacent property has now resorted to legal threats and is attempting to steal community land with a fake survey map. He is demanding we tear down our beautiful fence. This is an assault on our way of life and our property values. We will not be intimidated. The board is holding an emergency meeting tonight to authorize our legal counsel to fight this outrageous land grab with every resource at our disposal. It was perfect. Better than I could have hoped. She had publicly declared her intention to fight, framing it as a defense of the community. She was digging her own grave and calling it a victory parade. That night, I saw a flurry of cars arriving at the Willow Creek Clubhouse. The emergency meeting. I sat on my porch, sipping a bourbon, watching the lights in the distance. My cameras were rolling. The real action happened 2 days later. It was a Saturday, just like the day she'd tried to take down my tree. I received a motion alert on my phone. I opened the live feed. There she was. Brenda Von Hess, dressed in what looked like designer gardening attire, marching across the HOA common area toward my fence. She wasn't alone. With her were 2 men I recognized from her social media posts as her most ardent supporters on the board. One of them was carrying a heavy-duty set of bolt cutters. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was it. The moment of incrimination. I zoomed in with the camera. The audio pickup was crystal clear. This is our property, Brenda announced to her 2-man army, gesturing at the 3-foot strip of land. We are simply reclaiming what is ours. That fence is an illegal encroachment. She took the bolt cutters herself. There was a moment of struggle, they were thicker wires than she anticipated. Then, with a grunt and a loud snap, the top strand of my barbed wire fence came free. It recoiled like a wounded snake. She snapped the next 3 strands in quick succession. Then her 2 lieutenants went to work on the T-posts, rocking them back and forth until they could pull them from the ground. In less than 10 minutes, they had destroyed a 50-foot section of my fence. They stood there for a moment, admiring their work. Brenda was breathing heavily, a triumphant, manic grin on her face. It was all recorded in glorious 4K resolution. There, she said, dusting off her hands. Let's see him serve papers on us now. We were just defending our property. They walked away, leaving the coiled wire and uprooted posts lying in the dirt. I didn't call the sheriff. That would have been too simple, too clean. A misdemeanor charge for vandalism. No, I had bigger plans. This was just one piece of evidence, one tile in the mosaic of her downfall I was creating. I saved the video file, backing it up to 3 separate hard drives and a cloud server. Then I went out and calmly repaired the fence. The official, regularly scheduled HOA meeting was the following Tuesday. The agenda, posted online, listed border dispute with adjacent property as the main item. It was time for the first reveal. I walked into the clubhouse meeting room 5 minutes before it was scheduled to start. The room was filled with about 30 residents. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. Brenda and the 4 other board members were seated at a long table at the front. When Brenda saw me, her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed into slits of pure hatred. What are you doing here? She demanded. This is a private meeting for homeowners. The agenda says you're discussing my property, I said calmly, taking a seat in the front row. I believe that gives me a vested interest. And according to your own bylaws, Section 7, subsection C, meetings must be open to any party whose property is the subject of a board vote. I'm just here to listen. She was furious. I had read her own rules back to her, and she was trapped. She shot a venomous glare at the rest of the board, as if it were their fault. The meeting started with mundane business, approving the minutes, a discussion about replanting petunias by the front gate. Then Brenda cleared her throat, shuffled her papers, and launched into her grand performance. As you all know, she began, her voice filled with manufactured gravity, our community has been under assault from the owner of the neighboring property, Mr. Arthur Pennywell. She pointed a dramatic finger at me. He has made baseless claims to our land and threatened us with legal action. He is attempting to bully us into submission. She went on for 10 minutes, painting me as a combination of a greedy developer and a backwoods hermit. She lied about my responses, twisted the facts of the dispute, and claimed my survey was amateurish and fraudulent. This board, she concluded, her voice rising, will not stand for it. We have already taken the first steps to reclaim our rightful property line, and I am asking the board tonight to authorize a $5,000 retainer for our legal team to file a countersuit against Mr. Pennywell for slander of title and to seek a court order solidifying our historic boundary. She looked down the table at her board members, expecting their rubber stamp approval. That was my cue. I stood up. Madam President, I said, my voice cutting through the room. Before you vote on that, I believe I have some information that might be relevant to the discussion. You are out of order, she shrieked. You have no right to speak. I have a video, I said, ignoring her. I held up a small USB drive. It's only 2 minutes long. It's footage from this past Saturday, recorded from a camera on my property. It directly concerns the first steps you mentioned taking. I'm sure the homeowners here would be interested to see how their board president conducts business on their behalf. A murmur went through the crowd. The other board members looked at Brenda, their expressions a mixture of confusion and dawning apprehension. The treasurer, a nervous-looking man named Gerald, adjusted his glasses. Brenda's face had gone pale. That's illegal surveillance. You can't show that. Actually, in this state, there's no expectation of privacy in a location that's clearly visible from a neighboring property, I said, my voice still level and calm. It's perfectly legal. The clubhouse has a projector, I see. It will only take a moment. Before she could stop me, I walked to the front, plugged the USB drive into the laptop connected to the projector, and clicked on the video file. The image of Brenda, wild-eyed and triumphant as she wielded the bolt cutters, filled the screen on the wall behind her. The sharp snap of the wire breaking echoed through the silent room. Her voice, clear as a bell, filled the air. This is our property. We are simply reclaiming what is ours. The video ended. I turned to face the room. The homeowners were staring, their mouths agape. They looked from the screen, to me, and then to Brenda, who looked like she'd been struck by lightning. Her two accomplices from the video were sinking down in their chairs, trying to become invisible. Brenda shot to her feet, her face a mask of purple rage. That's fake. It's a deep fake. He's a liar. He doctored that video to frame me. She was screaming now, spittle flying from her lips. He threatened me. He's been harassing me for months. I was acting in self-defense. For the good of the community. Her denials grew more frantic, more unhinged. She threatened to sue me into oblivion. She accused me of being a corporate spy sent by a rival developer. She was a cornered animal, lashing out with everything she had. But the damage was done. The video was undeniable. Her credibility, at least in that room, had been shattered like cheap glass. The motion to retain the lawyers was not seconded. The meeting descended into chaos and was quickly adjourned. I had won the battle, but I knew the war was far from over. I had exposed her, but I hadn't removed her. A wounded predator is the most dangerous kind. I had drawn blood, and I knew the retaliation would be swift and vicious. I went home and checked my cameras, fortified my legal documents, and prepared for the coming storm. Brenda's response was not subtle. It was a declaration of total war, and she abandoned all pretense of operating within the bounds of reason or even the law. Her first move was to file a lawsuit against me. It was a frivolous, rambling document filled with absurd accusations. It claimed I was running a commercial cattle operation in a residential zone, I had 3 cows, that my property constituted a public nuisance, and that I had caused her severe emotional distress. It demanded $1 million in damages. It was a classic slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation. Designed not to win, but to bury me in legal fees and force me to back down. My lawyer friend laughed when he read it, calling it a work of fiction, but we still had to file a response, which cost time and money. Next, she weaponized her smear campaign. She went beyond the community forum and started posting in wider town social media groups. She twisted the story of the meeting, claiming I had intimidated the board with a threatening and doctored video. She posted my full name and address, labeling my ranch a blight on the community, and me a dangerous and unstable individual. She was trying to isolate me, to turn the entire town against me. But the attack that crossed the final, unforgivable line was the one she aimed at my family. My son, David, and his family came to visit one weekend. My 2 grandchildren, ages 6 and 8, loved the ranch. They loved chasing the chickens, feeding the cows, and exploring the creek bed. Their laughter was the first real, uncomplicated joy I'd felt in the house since Eleanor died. On Monday morning, 2 days after they had gone home, I got a call from a frantic David. "Dad, what the hell is going on over there?" he asked, his voice tight with panic. I just had 2 social workers from Child Protective Services at my door. My blood ran cold. What? Why? They received an anonymous tip, David said, his voice laced with disbelief. A complaint that the kids were staying in an unsafe and unsanitary environment at your ranch. They claimed there were unsecured firearms and hazardous materials accessible to them. Dad, they interviewed the kids. They asked my 8-year-old daughter if her grandpa ever made her feel uncomfortable. I had to sit down. My legs felt weak. The rage that filled me was so pure, so absolute, it was almost silent. She had brought my grandchildren into this. She had used a state agency designed to protect abused children as a weapon to terrorize my family. There are lines. In any conflict, there are lines you do not cross. Brenda Von Hess had just pole vaulted over one. My methodical, patient plan was no longer sufficient. Project Longview was moving from a defensive strategy to an all-out assault. I was no longer interested in just stopping her. I was going to dismantle her life, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but ruins. That night, I received an anonymous email. The subject line was simply Willow Creek. The body of the email was short. "I think you need to see these. I can't be part of this anymore." Attached were a series of scanned documents. Bank statements, invoices, and internal memos from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The sender was Gerald, the HOA treasurer. The nervous man with the glasses who had watched me with a conflicted expression during the meeting. My public stand had given him the courage to act. I opened the files, and my breath caught in my throat. It was the final piece of the puzzle. It was the smoking gun. The documents showed, in meticulous detail, how Brenda Von Hess had been embezzling HOA funds for years. She had been using the association's bank account as her personal piggy bank for her development company. There were invoices from a high-end land surveyor, the same one who had likely created her fraudulent map, paid for by the HOA but made out to Von Hess Properties. There were legal bills from a top-tier real estate law firm, also paid by the HOA, for services related to land acquisition research for Phase 2. There were charges for consulting fees, paid to a company that, after a quick search, I discovered was a shell corporation registered in her husband's name. She hadn't just been using HOA rules to harass me. She was using the residents' own money to fund her scheme to steal my land. We were talking about tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges. This wasn't just a civil matter anymore. This was felony-level financial crime. Grand larceny. Embezzlement. Wire fraud. I looked at the proof on my screen, and I felt a profound sense of clarity. The path forward was no longer shrouded in fog. It was a straight, clear road. The next morning, I did not call my lawyer. I did not call the sheriff. I called the district attorney's office. I got an appointment with an investigator in their white-collar crime division. I walked into his office with a thick binder. In it was every piece of evidence I had gathered. The threatening letters. The false complaints. High-resolution photos of the fence destruction. A thumb drive with the video. And finally, pristine copies of the financial documents Gerald had sent me. I laid it all out on the investigator's desk. I told him the entire story, from the first find to the CPS call. I presented it not as a hysterical victim, but as an engineer presenting a technical report. Here are the facts. Here is the data. Here is the inescapable conclusion. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he spent a long time looking through the binder, his eyes lingering on the bank statements. Finally, he looked up at me. Mr. Pennywell, he said slowly, people like this, they think they're untouchable. They build their little kingdoms and think the rules don't apply to them. He tapped the binder. You've done some very thorough work here. Leave this with me. We'll be in touch. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but I had just given them a V8 engine and a tank of nitro. A few weeks later, the County Planning Commission scheduled a public town hall meeting. The topic was the zoning application for a major new housing development. It was called Willow Creek Estates, Phase 2. Brenda had pushed for the meeting to be a big public event. She saw it as her coronation, the moment her grand plan would come to fruition. She had lobbied the commissioners hard, promising new tax revenue and community improvements. She thought it was going to be her victory lap. She had no idea it was going to be her execution. The investigator from the DA's office had called me. He told me to be at the meeting. He told me they would be there too, waiting. He told me to be ready to speak. The town hall was packed. Most of the residents of Willow Creek were there, whipped into a frenzy by Brenda's propaganda about progress and property values. Brenda herself was at the front, sitting with her team of lawyers and developers, looking regal and triumphant. When she saw me walk in, she smirked, a look of pure, condescending pity. She thought I was there to make a last, pathetic plea to save my ranch. The poor, lonely old man tilting at windmills. The meeting began. Her team gave a slick presentation with glossy renderings of the new development. They talked about parks and bike paths and community centers. They never once showed a map that detailed exactly how they planned to connect this new paradise to the existing roads. They never mentioned the century-old ranch that stood in their way. Then, the floor was opened for public comment. A few of Brenda's supporters stood up to sing her praises. Then the commission chair looked out at the audience. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this matter? I stood up. I would. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. Brenda whispered something to her lawyer, a smug smile on her face. She was ready for me. She thought she knew what I was going to say. I walked to the podium. I didn't bring a binder or a stack of papers. I just brought myself. My name is Arthur Pennywell, I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the microphone. My family has owned the Pennywell Ranch, which borders the proposed development, for 114 years. I am here to talk about property rights. But I'm not here to talk about mine. I'm here to talk about yours. I turned and looked at the residents of Willow Creek. For the past several months, the president of your homeowners association, Brenda Von Hess, has been engaged in a campaign of harassment and intimidation against me, all under the guise of protecting your property values. Brenda shot to her feet. Objection. This is not relevant to the zoning application. He is making personal attacks. The commission chair looked at me. Sir, please stick to the topic at hand. I am, I said calmly. Because this entire zoning application is predicated on a crime. The developer, Von Hess Properties, and the HOA president, Brenda Von Hess, are one and the same. And she has been illegally using your money, the money you pay in HOA dues, to fund her personal business venture. A loud gasp went through the crowd. Brenda's face was turning a blotchy red. Lies. He has no proof. Actually, I do, I said. But you don't have to take my word for it, I looked out into the audience. I believe your HOA treasurer, Gerald, would like to say a few words. Gerald stood up, trembling slightly but resolute. He walked to the podium as I stepped aside. He carried a small stack of papers. My name is Gerald Finney, he said, his voice shaking at first, then growing stronger. I am the treasurer of the Willow Creek HOA. For the last 2 years, our president, Mr. Brenda Von Hess, has been directing me to authorize payments for services that were for her private company. Surveyors, real estate lawyers, consultants. I have the bank statements and the invoices right here. She told me it was for community defense, but it was to prepare for this development. She has embezzled over $70,000 from the homeowners association. He held up the papers. The room erupted in a cacophony of shouts and accusations. The residents were on their feet, yelling at Brenda, at the board. Brenda was screaming. A raw, primal scream of fury and disbelief. He's lying. They're both lying. It's a conspiracy. I did it for you. For the community. I was making this place better. You ungrateful fools. Her confession, screamed in the middle of her denial, hung in the air. And at that moment, two men and a woman in plain clothes, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, began to walk purposefully down the center aisle. They had badges on their belts. They walked right up to the front table where Brenda was standing, still shrieking about conspiracies. Brenda von Hess, the lead investigator, said, his voice cutting through the noise. You're under arrest for grand larceny, embezzlement, and wire fraud. He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The world seemed to slow down. Brenda stared at the handcuffs as if they were alien objects. Her face went from red rage to a ghastly, waxy white. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a terrifying, silent understanding of her own ruin. As the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists, the only sound in the packed town hall was my own steady breathing. The noise of the crowd, the shouting, it all faded into a distant hum. I had done it. The engineer had designed the perfect demolition. They started to lead her away. As they passed me, her eyes, wild and full of hate, locked onto mine. She lunged, held back only by the firm grip of the investigators. You haven't won, she rasped, her voice a venomous hiss. I'll destroy you. I'll own that land if it's the last thing I do. It was her last, hollow threat. A final, impotent gust of wind from a storm that had already passed. Everyone in that room knew she was finished. I just stood there, my expression unreadable, and watched them take her away. The aftermath was swift and decisive. The zoning application for Phase 2 was denied unanimously by the Planning Commission. The story was front-page news in the local paper for a week. HOA president arrested for embezzlement in shocking town hall showdown. The Willow Creek HOA was thrown into chaos. The remaining board members who had been complicit in Brenda's scheme resigned in disgrace. A special election was held, and the community, now thoroughly awakened from their suburban slumber, elected Gerald as the new president. His first act was to draft a formal, written apology to me, which was delivered by hand along with a check for the damages to my fence. Brenda's world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. Faced with an ironclad case built on her own treasurer's testimony and my meticulous documentation, she took a plea deal. She was convicted of multiple felonies, sentenced to 5 years in state prison, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her husband divorced her while she was awaiting sentencing. Her development company went bankrupt. She lost everything, her money, her reputation, her freedom. Complete and total ruin. The community next door began to heal. The oppressive cloud of Brenda's tyranny was gone. The new board rescinded all the ridiculous bylaws she had instituted. People started planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. A basketball hoop appeared in a driveway. It started to look like a neighborhood instead of a sterile compound. I found myself reflecting on the whole ordeal. I had come to the ranch seeking peace, only to be drawn into a bitter war. But in fighting that war, I had found a different kind of peace. The peace that comes from standing your ground, from defending what is yours, from seeing justice done. It wasn't the quiet, passive peace I had envisioned, but it was a solid, earned peace that settled deep in my bones. Bullies, I realized, only have the power you cede to them. They thrive on intimidation and the assumption that good people will back down to avoid a confrontation. Brenda never imagined that the quiet old man on the other side of the fence had the skills, the patience, and the will to not just fight back, but to meticulously orchestrate her utter destruction using nothing more than the truth and her own monstrous ego. My great-grandfather's land grant was my shield, but my mind was the weapon. Now, the silence on the ranch is different. It's no longer tinged with the grief of what I've lost, but filled with the quiet satisfaction of what I've protected. My son and his family visit often. My grandchildren's laughter echoes through the old barn, and I know the legacy of this land is secure for their generation, and for generations to come. The old oak tree on the property line stands taller and prouder than ever, its branches reaching defiantly toward the sky, a silent testament to the resilience of things that are old and strong and deeply rooted. Sometimes, my neighbor Mark will walk his beagle along the fence, and we'll chat for a bit. The new fence, the one the HOA paid for, is a sturdy, handsome thing. A good fence for good neighbors. The other day, he told me that some of the new residents in Willow Creek refer to me, in hushed, respectful tones, as the surveyor. I just smiled. I finally have the peace I came for. It's a peace I had to fight for, but that just makes it all the more sweet. The hawks still ride the thermals, the golden grass still sways on the hillsides, and the Pennywell Ranch endures. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many little tyrants are out there, in HOAs or city councils or corporate boardrooms, who only hold onto their power because no one has had the patience to simply pull on the right thread and watch their whole world unravel? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to stand up to a bully like Brenda. It's important to share these stories, to remind ourselves that one person, armed with the truth, can still make a difference. And if you want to hear more tales of epic revenge and satisfying justice, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You never know, the next story might be about your own neighborhood.